Let's go to the first survey question of this panel, please. China's Belt Road Initiative has been bedding in deeper into the Near Asia Arab Gulf region through such major bilateral partnerships such as the Iran-China 25-year cooperation program and the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is the port of Gwadar on the Arabian Sea as its flagship project. You can nearly see Gwadar if you go out on the coast here on a clear day. These are very close places. Will these projects complement or compete with the midstream energy infrastructure on this side of the Arabian Sea? How are all of these connected? So, complement or compete? That is the question I have for the panel and for everybody to vote on in your leisure, please. Perhaps we might start with the Pakistan State Oil Company, given that they are here with us, for your thoughts.
Well, when you look at this opportunity, we have to take into context how the relationships exist now. So this entire one belt...
Just hold the microphone right at your mouth, yeah.
Yeah. So we have to compare like what are the relationships of the trade between Middle East and China and certain relationship right now. We look at the quantum of the volume of trade existing between UAE and China, the Saudi Arabia and China. So the idea of having this one belt, one road initiative is to link up those economies and bring more efficiencies. So we believe it will be mutually complementing ports and it will benefit both the Middle East as well as the Central Asia.
How will it be complementary? I mean, take Pakistan, for example.
Well, it will be complementing from the perspective, it will bring in the capital efficiencies. You'll see the oil surplus flowing in from the Gulf region to the east of China and passing through Pakistan. So it will financially and economically justify all those investments. Right now, it's without volume or economic sense. So if the integration is there, so this will be a mutually complementary thing.
Okay.
Other thing.
Hatem Al-Mosa, CEO of Sharjah National Oil Corporation, nearly from your office, you can nearly see Gwadar. Do you see these, I mean, this is Iran and Pakistan, massive investment coming in from China to develop infrastructure of all types, including energy. How do you see that from the point of view of the regional perspective, complementary or competition? And can we get the survey result, please? Your thoughts, Hatem. Give it a lash. See if you won't know unless you start talking whether it's working.
Hello. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Not really my area of expertise, but I expect that it will be generally complementary.
I mean, you're building an underground gas storage in Sharjah. Obviously, you have to be aware of where the regional or the in-country infrastructure is.
Yeah, especially with gas, it is always more regional than global. The impact from on the gas side, it's going to be fairly limited on the local side in the UAE. It's going to be more really on the downstream and the refining and the final products that it would have an impact if there's a competition of the refined products. And as you know, China is expanding significantly on that side. With that infrastructure happening in Pakistan and South Asia in general, that could compete with the downstream markets from the UAE, but I don't know if I can't really comment on how much of that impact would be.
What about on this side of the Gulf? I mean, in terms of the Belt Road Initiative coming in, we have Chinese investment across the region, not obviously just on that side, or obviously on this side as a whole as well. Do you feel that that you're seeing an integration, or there's a certain school of thought emerging that the Belt Road Initiative is running out of steam?
Again, I can't comment about that, whether it's running out of steam or it's still going. Of course, you don't hear of it now as you did almost 10 years ago, so that may give you an indication that it is running out of steam. But I think it's accomplishing its objectives, and it's reaching probably the end of its objectives, or the ultimate limit of its objectives.
Right. It's hitting, well, it's hitting certainly some debt, I mean, in terms of indebtedness to China from the Belt Road partners is problematic. Dave, your thoughts? We have as a result here 50-50 compete or complement, so there's the challenge. Your thoughts on this question of the regional energy infrastructure, let's just start there. Does it look to you like it's all somewhat emerging as a holistic, cohesive, or is it looking like, you know, we've an airline in Qatar, we've an airline in Dubai, we have an airline in Abu Dhabi, now the Saudi Arabia is talking about another global airline. These are all complementary competition. How do you see on the energy side?
Well, okay, I've got my mic here.
Yeah.
Is it coming through here?
I can hear you, but I hope, no, maybe use the handheld then.
Okay, that's good. I like handheld
yeah.
there anyway, so that works. So this is the ultimate sitting on the fence answer from the audience. So
Yeah.
all of you have to think again and answer again,
Yes.
I would say.
Do that again.
Let me give you a non-fence sitting answer, which is all of this infrastructure is 100% complementary, no doubt. Competition is not decided in infrastructure.
Right.
Competition is decided in price and relationships. So, you know, there will be competition in the region. There'll be competition. We're seeing it now with the shift in flows associated with the war in Ukraine. So there will always be competition, but it's decided by price. First and foremost, we see that brutally every day, and then relationships second, I would say. But infrastructure is necessary for these markets to function in the first place and for competition to truly play out. So infrastructure investments can be nothing but complementary, really.
What about, I mean, just to be the devil's advocate on that, there is a sense that, you know, Fujairah has the wisdom of first mover advantage as a major storage hub, but Duqm has similar plans in Oman. Is that complementary?
Absolutely. You know, Fujairah's success depends on the success of the region, and the region's success depends on Fujairah being well run. But the idea that sort of storage tanks compete with each other and pipelines compete with each other, I mean, look, at a certain point, there's an element of truth to that because they're competing for people to store their barrels, right? But actually, there isn't really sufficient infrastructure east of Suez for these markets and what's to come in these markets. You know, we heard some of our earlier panelists talking about, and some of our keynote speakers talking about where demand will peak and when demand will peak. You know, demand won't peak in Asia Pacific for another 15, 20 years, which means we need more infrastructure to support all of that. So,
because there's clearly not enough infrastructure.
Yeah.
We would look at LNG alone across Asia.
If you're building property in a hot real estate market, you're all complementing the environment.
Abu Dhabi ports, clearly, I mean, speak of the Belt Road Initiative maybe going off the headlines, but AD ports are replacing it in the headlines. You guys are doing so much stuff. Clearly, this wider economic region, as Dave points out, is proving to be a big opportunity for AD ports. What are your thoughts on this expanded Pakistan, Iran, East Africa from the point of view of connected, holistic, or competitive?
In all situations, there are competitions and complementing.
Just hold the mic right there to you. There you go.
Okay. There are competition, of course, and the competition is healthy actually to grow better and faster. And also at the same time, we are complementing each other, because without the competition, complementing will not be in place. Because of the competition, we start doing things that we are not doing before. We start building bases for hubs, for like shipping lines, to really strengthen this region. And we do also compete internally within the group in order to give a healthy environment. Now, linking to Pakistan, Iran, and the rest of the areas is really one of the major roles that Abu Dhabi wanted to play. One, it's of course to ensure that one of the main things is just food security. It's really important to have your own fleet. That's Abu Dhabi ports started the Safin feeder.
Just let me interrupt you and ask you, given the scale of AD ports' growth ambitions in recent times, what is the gap that you've identified in all of these places that wasn't already existing? Where's the opportunity? that you're identifying? I'm curious.
See, now the center of gravity moves south, actually.
Move south.
Yeah, and the emerging market will, in 2 years' time, will maybe count of around 45%. So we identify those areas. We wanted to link all of those things together. Most of the import and export done by sea, using the maritime. So in UAE, we're exporting more than 91% through the sea, around 80% of import. So those are a major player actually and account to how you grow and how you move and contribute to the economy.
Mohsin, in terms of Pakistan, I mean, obviously you're in a very challenging moment right now with the flooding, etc. And it's unclear what sort of support you may or may not be getting from the Belt Road Initiative. But could you just sort of tackle that point? Obviously you've signed this major agreement with China, but nonetheless, Gwadar isn't really progressing. We're not really seeing, given the scale of the page signature, we're not really seeing this implemented on the ground. Your thoughts about that and whether the Belt Road Initiative, at least from Pakistan's perspective, is not moving, let's say, as quickly or as significantly as maybe you were hoping?
So, so the thing is, you're absolutely right. The true potential will open up, unlock the value when you're able to generate that volume of trade through connectivity. Right now, we have been building the infrastructure mostly around the power sector, and then some of the roads. But the idea is to go on and build the pipelines and the ports and the storages infrastructure, related infrastructure, that will actually link up the Central Asia, the east of China, where the bulk of the next growth will come in. Because like you see, 94% of Chinese population is on the eastern half.
94% of the Chinese population is on the eastern side of China,
and
not on your side.
Not on our side. But the next phase of growth in China, if it has to grow on, it has to come from the west side.
Right.
And the energy flows will go definitely from the Gulf region upwards towards that western part. And here, this is where the real potential will unlock in.
Okay.
And when I say that it's mutually complementing, because right now, Middle East has been more of an energy market. It has a huge potential to be the financial hub and come up with the financial solutions for infrastructure finance and the trade solutions. And then if this really gets connected, we believe that it will eventually replace, the Persian Gulf will replace the Bay of Malacca as the next financial trade hub.
That would be, I mean, the big wheel of time in a way, given what you're thinking there. Let's get to this next survey question, which is a part of the equation in which we are all coexisting with, which is sanctions. I mean, if the China Belt Road Initiative has been taken off the headlines by many things, sanctions is certainly in the headlines, as we're all very aware. And we have at the moment in the US, as they say, on both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans, putting together legislation that will compel the US president and the administration to use secondary sanctions on international banks to strengthen the proposed price cap the G7 countries plan to impose on Russian oil over Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, which we saw during obviously the sanctions on Iran, secondary sanctions. Countries were seriously disincentivized to touch Iranian oil because of the consequences. So my question here is, in a world where we are increasingly surrounded by more and more sanctions, will that result in more adherence or less compliance in the east of Suez markets? More and more sanctions everywhere, does that result in more compliance or less? I welcome your voting on that and welcome your thoughts on that. Dave, maybe you could kick that one off.
Well, I don't want to influence the voting.
Yeah, let's get the voting done, and 10 seconds on the voting there, Emma.
Not that I think I could really
You could sway the audience,
sway
I'm
the
sure
audience
you could.
convincingly, but I always like to see the vote play out before
You
we
could sway
start to
Oliver
comment
Klaus,
on
I'm
it.
sure, typing away on his laptop down there. No.
All right, voting more or less done, Sean?
I think the voting's done, yes.
Okay,
We can
brilliant.
get the
Okay.
result on that.
So, I mean, for me, oh, there you go. Yeah, so, I mean, clearly less adherence to sanctions, and there's a few reasons for that, just in my opinion. I assume all the voting was anonymous, as you promised.
Of course,
people in the room
yes,
here, you
yeah.
know? But I mean, a few reasons. The more rules you have, the harder it is to follow them. I mean, almost quite literally, actually. You know, straightforward sanctions in a limited way against a limited number of targets, difficult enough to comply with, frankly, because there's a lot of ways you can mess that up. But when you layer more and more and more sanctions on top of the marketplace, there's more and more rules to follow, and it literally becomes harder to understand how to comply with them. And the best example of that first answer I would give you is last week in Singapore, there was a huge amount of discussion around the price cap concept and the question here. And even the people who are writing the rules of the price cap do not understand how the price cap will work. And we're willing to say so on stage. So if even the sanctions creators don't understand how they're going to be enforced, what they're going to mean, how is anybody else supposed to align with them, right? So clearly this is an environment of less compliance, for that reason alone, frankly. But the other reason I would give is because the more that you put the global energy markets under varying kinds of sanctions regimes, the less there is of a market for people to resort to if they want to be compliant.
Yes.
So upwards
Right.
of 15, 16, 17 million barrels a day of oil is subject to sanctions right now in a world of 100 million barrels a day of liquids consumption, 85 million barrels a day of crude oil consumption. You've only got 70 million barrels a day of unsanctioned crude oil to resort to, and the competition for that is just too hot. So legal reasons, the complexity is the first reason people will comply less. Economic reasons, the fact that the non-sanctioned barrel is becoming a smaller and smaller iceberg that is melting in the ocean makes it impossible to comply with. So the idea that sanctions is the answer to everything is going to prove itself to be inherently incorrect.
Hatem, your thoughts on that? I mean, increasingly we're in the neighborhood in which sanctions are around us, flows as Russian crudes and products come into the east of Suez market, into India, into China. More sanctions around that, on top of the Iran sanctions, which are unfortunately not being lifted, and they haven't found a resolution to that problem. What are your thoughts on its impact on investment in this midstream infrastructure as one case that all of these sanctions will be complied with, won't be complied with, help, don't help? Your thoughts?
I think on the general midstream investment in the world, I think that's almost irrelevant, the sanctions, whether they are increasing or decreasing, because they're really more for global demand and need. It's more on the compliance of the sanctions, whether people will comply or not. To get good compliance with the sanctions, you need buy-in from most of the world. And in the case of the sanctions against Russia, the compliance is not as widespread as it was with the sanctions on Iran.
Yeah, because there hasn't been any secondary consequences yet. But if the US Congress passes a legislation where secondary market consequences come, that could change.
It all depends on the price versus penalty. If you're getting Russian crude at 50% discount or 30% discount or whatever discount, the loss probably from the sanctions from the US or Europe, if Europe participates in it, may not overcome the benefit that you'll get from the supply. And when you're sanctioning Russia and you're sanctioning Iran, you're sanctioning Venezuela, there's so much sanctioned product around the world that it creates really a very big incentive for a lot of players to go and get a big discount.
It must be a big challenge for a port operator, Abu Dhabi Port, AD Ports. How big of an inhibitor is sanctions to your business and to the operations of your business? You have to become more of a policeman than a port operator. Your thoughts on all of these increasing sanctions?
When we talk about sanctions, we talk about rules. The more rules...
the what?
We're talking about sanctions, talking about rules.
Yeah, rules.
Yeah, so more rules there are more rules to break actually. So I think that will be less compliance when it comes to it. So on that, I mean, no country will disadvantage itself. So there will be new routes will come to serve different markets, and those markets will be and midway between countries and other countries. So, I mean, the route of shipping, ports, and volumes will change accordingly because of those changes. And I think that will have like two different areas on the right side of the globe and the left side of the globe when it comes to this one. The part that we are in, we're in the middle. And there is also a play that a role to play in this one. There will be an impact, of course, in certain areas, and there will be, again, in other areas as well.
Mohsin, what about it from a Pakistan point of view? Obviously, you're will be seeking where you can, like India, discounted oil, discounted fuels, and so forth, if the opportunity presents itself, as it is still perfectly legal to do so. But where do you think the sanctions will play, and how are they already impacting? You're a neighbor with Iran, a big country of 100 million, you're 200 million, and yet this increased sanction regime, how is it impacting your development?
For example, like we had this pipeline project with Iran, and they built the pipeline right up to the border. We're buying more expensive LNG, and it doesn't make economic rational work, because in fact the gas pipeline through Iran right next to the border would have been cheaper. So it does have a developmental impact for emerging economy like Pakistan. Secondly,
this was a pipeline that was proposed to connect through to India, right?
Yeah, this was supposed to go on to India. Then there are other problems now, like Turkmenistan gas pipeline, which was supposed to flow from Afghanistan to Pakistan to India eventually. But the main investor for that project, being the Gazprom, again, is in jeopardy now. So obviously, the access to economical energy resources are severely hampered by these sanctions. And I don't think so it's fixing anything in the world right now. It's just impacting certain economies, because without economic rationale, because energy flows are still there, I fail to understand what purpose does it serve, because we see the Russian oil and Iranian oil making its way in the global markets anyway. And it's the developing economies, the emerging economies, which are suffering from that.
And is in some ways pushing it even darker into darker places, so to speak. I wanted just to finish off with one last question on China and what the outlook for China is, because inevitably from the Belt Road Initiative point of view and from a demand market point of view, it's quite important. How will China's economic slowdown to normal OECD growth levels of 3% impact energy demand and investment in the midstream infrastructure needs across the New Silk Road? The perception that China was forever going to be an increasing demand market and all of the associated infrastructure that needed to serve that, I think now is starting to look a little bit different. Now there's a certain viewpoint that that this is a temporary thing in China, zero COVID, but there's a lot of other issues there, and China's slowdown to OECD levels of 2-3% would be perfectly normal for any developed economy. So will this have no impact, as 3% growth of a massive economy like China is still huge? 2, will it discourage investment in Mideast, investment in further expansions across Asian markets? C, discourage further Chinese investment across the Belt Road Initiative countries? That's a survey question for everybody to click on and put their vote in. We have 10 seconds on that, as Dave doesn't want to swing the vote here again, so we will see where this goes. But I think it's inevitably an important point, and indeed will China re-emerge out of it. No impact, as 3% growth of a massive economy like China is still huge. Dave, you can lead us off on your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I disagree with how many? 58% of the room here.
Yeah, 58. No impact.
I'm in the 19% and happily there. I think it's important to think about what is the Belt Road Initiative really about, and what really drives the Belt Road Initiative. Actually, I don't think we have many people, if anybody, here from China today.
No,
what with the
Chinese aren't traveling, unfortunately, at the moment.
And same in Singapore last week. You know, COVID has transformed the mentality of global and local markets in ways that have yet to be fully understood. And I think COVID has dramatically transformed the Chinese mindset around something like the Belt Road Initiative. The question here is about economic growth, but I think it's all connected.
Yeah.
You know, what is that initiative really about? It's a projection of economic influence. It's a projection of cultural relevance. And when your economy is growing by 9% or 8%, the appetite to do something like that is enormous. When your economy's growth is slowing, not the economy slowing, but the growth of the economy is slowing, every country in the world turns inward when that happens. Every single country, including China. And I think we will see massive redirection of investment towards renewable energy, local infrastructure, debottlenecking the country to get that economy going again. That's what actually the country needs. And I think it's inevitable that the emotional patriotic ambition to extend hegemony that way will dissipate very quickly. It does for every country, Sean. And the need to get the economy growth going faster again, that will become an inward-looking exercise as it does for every country.
Hatem, your thoughts on that? I mean, inevitably, China is the major market destination for most Gulf energy. It's the biggest customer of Saudi Arabia, the biggest customer of Oman, etc. And a lot of infrastructure, you know, plans for downstream refineries that have already been built, ones that in the market of these big customers. So your thoughts of what appears to be, at the very least, a China slowing to an OECD average. We'll see if it's worse or better, but impact on investment in the midstream. Your thoughts?
I'm also in the 19%.
You're also in the 19%. So we have 50% in of the stage, 19% in the audience. Yep.
I would say, I would have said exactly what you just said. 3%, yes, it's a lot of money, but it is a significant reduction from what it used to be. So even though it's very big, it's also very big down from the original levels. And with such stress in the Chinese economy, it is going to turn inwards and reduce investment outwards. Now, whatever has started, I expect that will continue and will be finished. But as for new projects, I doubt that's going to be the priority at this point.
That's not good news for you, Mohsin.
Well, I kind of agree with the fact, like Chinese economy, given the magnitude, even a 3% growth and expected to go on to 5% in the next few years if they go through the COVID restrictions is good enough. But the other thing that I see is that the Chinese investments and also the Middle Eastern investment related to the similar kind of projects have been often competing. With this slowing down, the economic rationale and the true potential of the projects will come up now, because as you were initially saying, like, you don't see the volume of trade and finance flowing through those projects. So with this slowing down, and when there's a competition for capital, then all those projects will have to make economic rational sense. So that's an opportunity as well from that perspective.
And finally, Abu Dhabi ports, of course, a China slowdown, a China not investing. Is that opportunity for you, given they're heavily engaged in East Africa, or is it you need the engine of China coming across in order to make your projects viable?
Of course, it's an opportunity for us, and we see in everything there is an opportunity. Approximately like 20 companies invested in our industrial zone, more than $1.6 billion. And through the Belt and Road, Silk Belt and Road, it is to connect, and we are part of it. And through the changes, there will be a requirement to open a new markets, to change actually the focus from different areas. And we are also more in emerging markets. And part of it in Africa, of course. That is also a shift for us and for them. And this is part of our strategy, actually. This is part of our strategy, and that's how we will see it. Of course, there will be an impact in areas, but there will be an opportunity in different areas. That's how we see it in here.
I don't want to close our session without getting everybody's possible commentary on the outlook for today's news, which is OPEC. the decision this evening. Not that it's immediately relevant to the topic of our conversation, but I just wanted, particularly Dave, for you to share with us your thoughts on the outlook for the OPEC meeting today. What do you think it means, could happen?
Yeah, so this is the topic of the day, so I appreciate the chance to talk about it on the panel here. You know, none of us knows what will happen in Vienna today. Obviously, I don't have any special inside knowledge either, although we all have staff in Vienna, you know, talking with the people who were there. It seems fairly clear that OPEC will agree to cut something between 1 million and 2 million barrels a day of production, potentially from November, which would be a pretty dramatic statement of intent for the end of the year in Q1, Q2. And interestingly, we were talking about this last night, it looks like the markets are already pricing in a cut. So if the markets are pricing in already a cut of up to 2 million barrels a day, and that gets us to $95 a barrel in crude oil, it kind of locks OPEC into having to do it. Because if OPEC doesn't cut this afternoon, the potential for the market to unwind after that...
It's a bit like the Fed. If the Fed signals and doesn't do...
Correct. It's completely unthinkable. My personal view is OPEC got a little bit over its skis on this one. It's unusual for OPEC to cut in a high price environment, and also before a recession happens. It would be more typical to cut when a recession is playing out and prices are already falling. So is OPEC over its skis? Possibly. Is it already skiing downhill and has to do off the jump? It certainly does. So the only question is really how big will the cut be? If they leave Vienna without having cut, they will have probably done more damage than good to their ambitions in the marketplace. They will exaggerate volatility, not weaken it. So they've already locked themselves into the outcome, I would say.
Hatem, you get the last word on this. From the point of view of, given Dave's point there that it's somewhat unprecedented to be cutting ahead of the price crash, right? They're trying to preempt perhaps what happened a few years ago. Your thoughts on what you think they will do, and does this market require a cut at this time?
If you look at the macroeconomic sense for the world, it doesn't make any sense to cut production at this point. However, I expect OPEC will, rather than cut 2 million barrels a day, they might announce reduction of quotas by 2 million barrels a day, or 1 million barrels a day, which in reality might end up to be 100 or 200,000 barrel cut from Saudi Arabia and the UAE and maybe 1 or 2 other countries. Because most of the countries are producing significantly lower than their quotas, including Russia, which is also the second biggest player in OPEC. So announcing a cut for Russia or for nearly all of the OPEC nations will result in no cut at all. So it will impact only the 2 countries probably with the surplus So it depends how also they will announce that cut. Whether they will announce it as revising the quotas, then the psychological impact would be reduced. If they say we're cutting 2 million barrels, even though it will not be 2 million barrels, the psychological impact would be bad and it will probably accelerate recession.
Well, it certainly, I think, maybe sets them up for having the ability to be more impactful later, because if you reduce this fictional production and it's removed, then you'd say the next time they get together, then they'll really have some muscle. Listen, we'll have to wrap it up there for this session. And great, and thank you, AD Ports, Pakistan State Oil Company, Sharjah National Oil Corporation, S&P Global Commodity Insights. Thank you for participating in this session and sharing some of your thoughts.